The late afternoon sun, a molten gold coin slipping toward the horizon, cast long, distorted shadows across the asphalt ribbon of Old Creek Road. Elara Vance squinted against the glare, the unseasonably warm April air, carrying the scent of damp earth and budding honeysuckle. Usually, the number 12 bus, rattling and sighing, would be her chariot home from the mind-numbing inventory checks at Pages and Provisions, the independent bookstore where she'd recently landed a part-time job. But today, a mercifully short shift, combined with the unexpected glory of the afternoon, had coaxed her into walking the 3 miles back to her small apartment on the edge of Havenwood. Havenwood wasn't grand, nestled in the crook of a river valley, a town that felt perpetually caught between sleepy nostalgia and the slow creep of suburban sprawl. Old Creek Road skirted its western edge, flanked by overgrown fields on one side and a sparse line of aging maples on the other, their new leaves unfurling in tender shades of green. Elara savored the quiet rhythm of her footsteps on the cracked pavement, a welcome contrast to the fluorescent hum and forced smiles of retail. She needed this decompression. School had finished months ago, launching her into the bewildering expanse of postgraduate uncertainty. The job was a necessity, a way to chip away at student loans and, more importantly, build the fund for her escape pod. A car, not a new one, nothing fancy, just 4 wheels and an engine that could carry her away from the feeling of being stuck, tethered to bus schedules and the suffocating weight of expectations she couldn't quite define. Her gaze drifted across the road, tracing the dance of dust motes in the slanted sunlight. Then something snagged her attention, a shape, a large incongruous lump nestled in the tall grass just off the shoulder, looking like a discarded heap of old blankets or insulation. But there was a texture to it, a suggestion of something organic beneath the roadside detritus. Curiosity, mingled with an innate, almost painful empathy for anything vulnerable, pulled her off course. Elara had always possessed this strange magnetism towards the wounded, the overlooked, a trait her mother, Helen, called collecting strays, sometimes with affection, sometimes with exasperation. As she drew closer, the amorphous shape resolved itself. Not blankets. Fur, thick matted, and stained a horrifying mosaic of rust red and dark, wet crimson. It was a dog, a very large dog sprawled in an unnatural posture of utter collapse. A wave of nausea rolled through her. The air grew thick with the coppery tang of blood, sharp and sickening. He was grievously injured. Even from several feet away, the damage was appalling. Wounds gaped open on his flank and shoulder, ragged tears in the thick coat. One front leg was bent at an impossible angle, the sharp, white shard of bone protruding obscenely through torn flesh and fur. It was a sight so brutal, so visceral, that Elara felt her breath catch in her throat. Flies buzzed insistently around the rawest injuries, a morbid halo. Some wounds were terrifyingly deep. She could almost see the glistening dark shapes of his insides threatening to spill out. Bile rose in her throat, hot and acidic. Was he even alive? The stillness was absolute, terrifying. She hesitated, a cold dread gripping her. This was too much, too broken. What could she possibly do? Run? Call animal control? But the thought of leaving him there, alone and shattered, felt like a betrayal of some fundamental part of herself. Taking a tentative step closer, her sneakers crunching softly on the gravel shoulder, she strained to see any sign of life. Please, she thought, just a twitch, a breath. And then, as if summoned by her silent plea, a low, guttural moan escaped the dog's lips, a sound so laden with agony it physically hurt Elara to hear. Slowly, painfully, 2 large, liquid brown eyes opened, unfocused at first, then seeming to latch onto her presence. They were eyes filled with unimaginable suffering, confusion, and a primal fear. Yet beneath it all, Elara saw something else, a flicker, faint but distinct, of bewildered gentleness. He was alive. Barely, horrifyingly, but alive. Panic warred with a fierce, protective instinct. He was far too large for her to lift, easily over 70 pounds of dead weight, maybe more. Carrying him the remaining 2 miles to the nearest vet clinic, Havenwood Animal Hospital, was impossible. Her mind raced. Phone. She needed her phone. Fumbling in the pocket of her worn canvas jacket, her fingers trembling, she pulled it out. Her contact list swam before her eyes. Liam Evans. Her oldest friend, steadfast and reliable, lived only 10 minutes away by car. He'd understand. He always did. She stabbed at his contact, pressing the phone to her ear, the dial tone an agonizingly slow pulse against the backdrop of the dog's ragged breathing. "Hey, Lara, everything okay?" Liam's voice, warm and familiar, was a lifeline. "Liam, I need help. Now!" Her voice was tight, breathless. "I'm on Old Creek Road, maybe half a mile past the bridge. There's a dog. He's hurt. Badly. Really, really badly." "Whoa, slow down. Hurt how? Hit by a car, maybe?" "I don't know. Liam, he's ripped open. Bone sticking out. I can't move him alone. Can you come? Please?" There was no hesitation. "On my way. 5-10 minutes tops. Don't move him if you don't have to. Just stay with him. I'll bring blankets." "Okay, hurry." She ended the call, her hand shaking, kneeling carefully beside the injured animal, keeping a respectful distance but wanting him to know he wasn't alone. She spoke softly. "Hey there, fella. Help's coming, okay? Just hang on. Someone's coming." He moaned again, a softer sound this time, and his eyes tracked her movement. He didn't growl, didn't show his teeth, didn't display any aggression despite the obvious agony he was in. That gentleness she glimpsed seemed intrinsic, buried deep beneath the layers of pain. Impulsively, Elara shrugged off her favorite sweater, a soft, oversized navy blue knit her grandfather Arthur had given her years ago. It smelled faintly of her lavender detergent and wood smoke from Grandpa's fireplace. Carefully avoiding the most horrific wounds, she draped it over the dog's shivering body, trying to offer some small measure of warmth and comfort, using a corner to gently press against a steadily oozing gash on his shoulder. A futile attempt to staunch the bleeding. He flinched slightly at the contact but didn't resist. He just watched her with those devastatingly sad eyes. The potential danger, a dog this size in this much pain, could easily lash out, registered dimly in the back of her mind. But the overwhelming feeling was one of connection, a silent understanding passing between them on that lonely stretch of road. He needed comfort. He needed someone to simply be there in his darkest hour. Left alone, the life flickering in those brown eyes would undoubtedly extinguish before the sun fully set. The thought was unbearable. She stroked his broad head very gently, avoiding the matted, bloody fur near his ear. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, though the words felt hollow even to her. "We're going to get you help." Minutes stretched into an eternity, measured by the dog's shallow breaths and the distant hum of approaching traffic. Finally, the familiar rumble of Liam's aging hatchback broke the stillness. He pulled over sharply, gravel spraying, and was out of the car before the engine died, his expression shifting from concern to visible shock as he took in the scene. "Oh man, Elara, this is bad." Liam, usually unflappable with his easy grin and perpetually messy brown hair, looked pale. He was already unfolding a thick plaid blanket from his trunk and produced a sturdy, shallow cardboard box, likely scavenged from his own part-time job at the local hardware store. "I know," Elara whispered, her throat tight. "We need to get him to Dr. Reed's clinic. Fast?" Liam nodded grimly. "Okay, let's try to slide the blanket under him gently. We'll use it as a sling to lift him into the box. Try not to jostle that leg." Working together with slow, deliberate movements, they managed to ease the blanket beneath the dog's heavy body. He whimpered, a high, thin sound that tore at Alara's heart, but remained passive. Carefully coordinating their lift, they hoisted him, the blanket taking most of the weight, and settled him into the box Liam had placed in the hatchback's cargo area. The dog curled instinctively, trying to make himself smaller, his breathing shallow and rapid. Alara climbed into the back beside the box, unable to leave his side. Liam drove with uncharacteristic urgency, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, navigating the familiar streets towards Havenwood Animal Hospital. Alara kept murmuring reassurances to the dog, stroking the less injured side of his head, her hand coming away sticky with something she prayed wasn't just blood. She felt oddly detached, running on pure adrenaline. The horror of the situation held at bay by the immediate need for action. The clinic sign, a cheerful blue silhouette of a cat and dog, seemed cruelly ironic as Liam pulled into the parking lot. He cut the engine and they were moving again, carefully lifting the box, Alara's borrowed sweater still draped over the suffering animal. The automatic doors slid open, revealing the clean, slightly antiseptic-smelling waiting area. A young woman in blue scrubs looked up from the reception desk, her professional smile faltering as she saw the state of their charge. "Oh my goodness! What happened?" she exclaimed, already reaching for the intercom. "Found him on Old Creek Road," Liam explained quickly. "Hit by a car, we think. He's critical." "Dr. Reed! Emergency intake!" the nurse called, her voice sharp with urgency. Almost immediately, a woman with short, practical gray hair and kind but serious eyes emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on her green scrubs. This was Dr. Evelyn Reed, Havenwood's veteran veterinarian, known for her calm competence and deep love for animals. Her eyes assessed the situation in an instant. "Bring him straight through. Exam room 2. They followed her down a short hallway, the clinic sounds, distant barking, the hum of equipment, fading into a dull roar in Alara's ears. They carefully lifted the dog onto the cold steel examination table. Dr. Reed and the nurse moved with practiced efficiency, their hands gentle but firm as they began their assessment, cutting away soiled fur, checking vitals, murmuring observations in low tones. Massive trauma, probable internal injuries, femur fracture, compound, significant blood loss, shock. The fragments of their conversation painted a terrifying picture. "We need to get fluids started, Stat. Pain management. X-rays," Dr. Reed directed, her focus absolute. "Can you two wait outside? We need space to work." Reluctantly, Alara and Liam retreated to the small, sterile waiting area. The adrenaline that had carried Alara began to ebb, replaced by a crushing wave of anxiety and exhaustion. She sank onto a hard plastic chair, burying her face in her hands. The image of the protruding bone, the vacant look in the dog's eyes, the smell of blood, it all flooded back, overwhelming her. Liam sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Alara. You found him. You got him here. That's huge." "But what if it's not enough, Liam?" Her voice was muffled by her hands. "He looked so broken." She thought of her car fund, painstakingly saved, dollar by dollar. Vet bills, especially emergency ones, were notoriously expensive. This dog would need surgery, maybe multiple surgeries, intensive care. The cost would be astronomical. Could she even afford it? Should she? The practicalities crashed against the raw emotion of the encounter. The wait stretched, each minute thick with tension. The clinic phone rang intermittently. Other clients came and went with their pets, oblivious to the life-or-death drama unfolding behind the closed door of exam room 2. Alara paced, sat, stood up again, unable to settle. Liam scrolled through his phone, occasionally offering quiet words of encouragement, but mostly just providing a steady, silent presence. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes, Dr. Reed emerged, her expression grave. She pulled off her surgical cap, running a hand through her short gray hair. "Well," she began, her voice low and serious, "we've stabilized him for now, got fluids running, Strong painkillers on board. We did a quick scan for a microchip. Nothing. So no easy way to find an owner, assuming he even has one. Alara held her breath. How bad is it? Dr. Reed sighed, meeting Alara's gaze directly. It's bad, Alara. Very bad. He's young, maybe 6, 7 months old, a mixed breed, looks like some shepherd, maybe husky or Malamute in there. Hard to tell with the state he's in. The leg fracture is severe, complex, but the internal injuries, that's the biggest immediate concern. There's definite internal bleeding, though we haven't pinpointed the exact source yet. He's lost a lot of blood. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Treating him, it's going to be intensive, expensive. Multiple surgeries, starting with exploratory surgery to address the bleeding, then tackling the leg, extensive wound care. And even then, her voice softened slightly, there are absolutely no guarantees. His chances are guarded at best. Alara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying, Dr. Reed said gently but firmly, that given the severity of his injuries, the cost involved, and the uncertain prognosis, the kindest option might be euthanasia, letting him go peacefully without further suffering. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Euthanasia. It was a practical, merciful suggestion from a medical standpoint, but Alara thought of those brown eyes, the flicker of gentleness, the soft moan. He was fighting. He hadn't given up yet. Can I see him before I decide? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Reed nodded understandingly. Of course. Follow me. She led Alara back to exam room 2. The dog lay on the table, now covered with a clean white sheet, an IV line snaking into his less injured front leg. He looked incredibly vulnerable, dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. The harsh fluorescent lights highlighted the shave patches around his wounds, the tight stitches closing the worst of the gashes. He was still terribly weak, his breathing shallow, but the frantic edge of pain seemed to have eased slightly thanks to the medication. Alara approached the table slowly, her heart aching. Hey boy, she whispered, reaching out a tentative hand towards his head. As her fingers brushed his fur, something shifted. His eyes, previously half closed and dull, fluttered open. They focused on her face, and then the impossible happened. A faint, almost imperceptible thump, thump, thump against the steel table. His tail. Beneath the sheet, his tail was wagging. Just a tiny, weak movement, but it was undeniable. He recognized her. He remembered the woman who had stopped, who had offered a shred of comfort on the roadside. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, blurring her vision. She gently rubbed the spot behind his ear, careful of the IV line. As her hand lingered, his rough pink tongue snaked out and gave her fingers a single, soft lick. It wasn't just a reflex. It felt intentional, a gesture of connection, almost as if he were trying to comfort her. That was it. The decision, which had seemed impossibly complex moments before, solidified with absolute clarity. The car fund, the carefully hoarded savings meant for freedom and escape, suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the life flickering on the table before her. This dog, this broken, battered creature who still had the strength to wag his tail for a stranger, deserved a chance. She looked up at Dr. Reed, her voice thick with emotion but firm. We're not letting him go. Do whatever you need to do. Use the money I saved from my car. Just, please, try to save him. Dr. Reed studied Alara for a long moment, then a small, approving smile touched her lips. All right, Alara, we'll do everything we can, but we need to get started immediately. And he needs a name. It feels wrong putting him through all this without one. Alara looked down at the dog, at the quiet strength radiating from him despite his broken body. He would need courage, resilience, the heart of a fighter to endure what lay ahead. A name came to her, strong and resonant. "Orion," she said softly, "like the hunter in the stars. He needs to be a warrior." Dr. Reed nodded. "Orion it is. A fitting name. Now let us get to work. We'll start with stabilizing him further and addressing the internal bleeding first. The leg, we'll set it temporarily. Try to restore blood flow. But the major orthopedic surgery will have to wait until he's stronger. One battle at a time." The first surgery was long and harrowing. Dr. Reed and her team worked for hours, meticulously searching for and repairing the sources of internal bleeding, cleaning the deep, contaminated wounds, stitching together layers of muscle and skin. They carefully set the fractured femur, applying a temporary splint, hoping against hope that the fragile blood supply to the damaged bone wouldn't be compromised. Orion was pumped full of fluids, antibiotics, and pain medication. Finally, late into the night, Dr. Reed emerged, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. "He's through the surgery," she reported to Alara and Liam, who had remained steadfastly in the waiting room, fueled by lukewarm coffee and shared anxiety. "We found and repaired a significant tear in his spleen and several smaller bleeders in the surrounding tissue. The wounds are cleaned and closed for now. We've done all we can surgically at this stage. Now, it's up to him. The next 12 to 24 hours are critical. If he makes it through the night, his chances improve significantly." Leaving Orion at the clinic felt like abandoning a part of herself. He was heavily sedated, resting in a warm recovery kennel, monitors beeping softly beside him, but the urge to stay, to watch over him, was overwhelming. Dr. Reed gently reassured her that he was in the best possible hands and that rest was crucial for both of them. Walking out into the cool night air, the reality of her decision hit Alara with full force. The initial estimate Dr. Reed had provided for the first surgery and immediate care had already consumed more than half of her car savings. Future surgeries, medications, physical therapy, the costs would continue to mount. A wave of panic washed over her. What if she ran out of money? What if, after all this, she was forced to make that terrible choice simply because her funds were depleted? Liam seemed to sense her turmoil as they walked towards his car. "Hey," he said quietly, "don't worry about the money right now. We'll figure something out." "How, Liam?" Alara sighed, leaning her head back against the cool window glass as he drove her home. "It's thousands of dollars. I barely make enough to cover rent and bills." "I have an idea," Liam said, a thoughtful expression on his face. People respond to stories like this. Your story, Orion's story. Let me put something together. A few posts on social media, maybe a local community page. Explain what happened, how you found him, how you're using your savings. People might want to help." Alara hesitated. Asking for money felt deeply uncomfortable. "I don't know, Liam." "Just let me try," he insisted. "Worst case, nothing happens. Best case, Orion gets the help he needs, and you don't have to carry this whole burden alone. You saw him, Alara. That dog wants to live. And you have a ridiculously soft heart. People connect with that." Too exhausted to argue, Alara simply nodded. "Okay, Liam, if you think it might help." That night, sleep eluded her. Her small apartment felt unnervingly empty. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren made her jump. She replayed the events of the day, the horrific injuries, the wagging tail, the weight of the financial commitment. Did she do the right thing? Meanwhile, Liam was crafting his posts. He wrote about Alara finding the grievously injured dog, about her compassion, her sacrifice of the car fund. He included a photo he'd discreetly snapped of Alara kneeling beside Orion on the roadside, carefully cropping out the most graphic injuries, and a carefully worded summary of the vet's assessment and the expected costs. He emphasized Alara's determination to give Orion a fighting chance and included a link to a simple online fundraising page he quickly set up. directing funds straight to Havenwood Animal Hospital under Orion's name. He shared it on his own feed, tagged local Havenwood groups, and sent it to a few mutual friends, asking them to spread the word. He didn't expect miracles, just hoped for a little help for his friend and the dog who had captured her heart. He couldn't have predicted the response. The first tentative donations trickled in overnight. $5 from a former classmate, $20 from Liam's aunt, $10 from a stranger who commented, "Bless your kind heart." But as morning broke and people started their day, sharing Liam's post, something shifted. The story resonated. Ilara's quiet act of selflessness, her willingness to sacrifice her own dream for a suffering animal, especially a mixed breed, often overlooked in favor of purebreds, struck a chord within the Havenwood community and beyond. Liam's phone started buzzing incessantly with notifications. The post was being shared hundreds, then thousands of times. Comments flooded in. "What an incredible young woman, restoring my faith in humanity." Star. "Sending healing thoughts to Orion. Keep fighting, brave boy." Star. "Just donated. Every little bit helps. Thank you, Ilara, for not looking away." Star. "My rescue dog changed my life. Praying for a happy ending here." Star. By the time Ilara woke up after a few hours of restless sleep, bleary-eyed and anxious, Liam called her, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Ilara, you need to see this. The fundraiser. It's going crazy." Hesitantly, Ilara checked the link Liam sent. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The initial goal Liam had tentatively set, enough to cover the estimated cost of the second major surgery, had already been surpassed. Donations were pouring in, small and large, from neighbors, from people in nearby towns, even from strangers across the country who had somehow stumbled upon the story. Accompanying the donations were messages of support, encouragement, and shared stories of animal rescue. Ilara felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. She wasn't alone in this. A community, virtual and real, had rallied around her and Orion. The first thing she did was call the clinic. Her voice trembled as she asked the morning receptionist about Orion. "He had a stable night, dear," the receptionist reported kindly. "Doctor." Reed was very pleased with his progress. He even lifted his head when the technician went in this morning. Relief washed over Ilara in a dizzying wave. He'd made it through the night. It was the first hurdle cleared. That afternoon, armed with the knowledge that the immediate financial pressure had eased thanks to the kindness of strangers, Ilara practically ran to the clinic during her lunch break. Dr. Reed met her with a cautious smile. "He's a fighter, this one," she said, leading Ilara back to the recovery area. Orion was awake, though still clearly weak and groggy from the medication. He lay in his kennel, the bulky splint on his leg making him look awkward and vulnerable. But as Ilara approached, his ears perked up. He whined softly, a questioning sound. And then that tail started thumping again, a steady rhythmic beat against the kennel floor. "Hey, warrior," Ilara whispered, kneeling down, her face close to the wire mesh. "You made it." He shifted, trying to get closer, and nudged his nose against the wire. When she carefully slipped her fingers through, he licked them eagerly, his brown eyes fixed on her face with an expression of pure, trusting adoration. It was a connection forged in trauma and solidified by compassion, a bond strengthening with every shared glance, every gentle touch. Ilara spent her entire lunch break sitting by his kennel, talking to him softly, telling him about the people who were rooting for him, promising him warm beds and sunny walks. The next few days established a fragile rhythm. Orion remained stable, slowly regaining strength. Ilara visited every day, her presence clearly boosting his spirits. He began eating small amounts of soft food, his appetite a welcome sign. The veterinary team marveled at his resilience. Even the severely fractured leg, initially a source of major concern regarding infection and healing, seemed to be knitting together better than expected under the temporary splint. Dr. Reed decided to hold off on the major orthopedic surgery, hoping conservative management might be enough, minimizing the risk of another major operation while he was still recovering internally. Within a week, Orion was strong enough for short, assisted walks down the clinic hallway. He leaned heavily on his good legs, the splinted limb held awkwardly off the ground, but his tail wagged furiously with the effort. Each time Alara arrived, he would struggle to his feet, whining with excitement, pressing against the kennel door until she let him out for his brief excursion. He'd limp alongside her, bumping his head affectionately against her hand, his eyes bright with the simple joy of movement and her presence. The outpouring of support online continued, the fun growing steadily. Liam managed the updates, sharing photos Alara took during her visits. Orion cautiously sniffing an offered treat. Orion sleeping peacefully. Orion attempting a wobbly walk, keeping the community engaged. Despite the widespread sharing of Orion's story and photos, no one came forward claiming to be his original owner. Alara found herself increasingly hoping no one would. The thought of taking him home, of making him officially hers, began to bloom in her heart, a tentative bud of hope. Then, just as things seemed to be on an upward trajectory, disaster struck. It started subtly. A small, weeping sore developed near the incision site on his injured leg, refusing to heal despite diligent cleaning and topical treatments. Then, Orion became listless, refusing his food. His temperature spiked. Dr. Reed's brow furrowed with concern during her morning check. "I don't like the look of this," she told Alara over the phone, her voice laced with worry. "The tissue around that wound, it looks angry, inflamed. And this fever, I'm worried about infections setting in deep, maybe even reaching the bone. Necrosis is a serious risk here." Necrosis? Tissue death. The word sent a chill down Alara's spine. If the infection spread, if the tissue died, amputation might become the only option to save his life. Dr. Reed acted swiftly. Orion was put under light sedation, and she carefully debrided the affected area, cutting away the discolored, unhealthy flesh around the wound, hoping to remove the source of infection and encourage healthy tissue growth. He was started on a powerful course of intravenous antibiotics. It was another tense waiting game. For 3 days, Orion hovered in a precarious state. His fever fluctuated. He remained lethargic, barely responding even to Alara's visits, his tail still. Alara felt sick with worry, the initial optimism replaced by a gnawing fear. Had they come this far only to lose him to infection? Was amputation inevitable? She spent hours by his kennel, whispering encouragement, willing him to fight back. The online community, updated by Liam, sent waves of virtual support, prayers, and healing energy. Then on the 4th morning, there was a change. His temperature had dropped back to normal overnight. When Alara arrived, his eyes were brighter. He managed a weak tail wag. Dr. Reed examined the wound cautiously. "Look," she said, pointing. "See that edge? Pink, healthy granulation tissue starting to form, and the swelling is down." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. I think we caught it in time. The antibiotics are working. We might just save this leg after all." The relief was immense, almost dizzying. Orion seemed to sense the shift too. Over the next few days, his recovery accelerated. The wound began to heal properly, the angry redness fading. His appetite returned with a vengeance, and his short walks became slightly longer, his limp less pronounced. He started showing flashes of puppyish energy, batting playfully at a dangling leash or trying to instigate a gentle tug-of-war with a towel. Alara felt like she could finally breathe again. He was getting better, really, truly better. She started making concrete plans for bringing him home, researching dog beds, buying food bowls, mentally rearranging her small apartment to accommodate her soon-to-be large companion. Dr. Reed estimated another week, maybe 10 days, and Orion would be ready for discharge. Alara counted down the days, her excitement growing. She'd even tentatively started browsing online classifieds for used dog crates. The nightmare seemed to be finally receding, replaced by the bright promise of a shared future. What happened next blindsided her completely. It was a Tuesday morning. Alara was at work, distractedly restocking shelves, her mind already leaping ahead to her afternoon visit with Orion. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the clinic. Usually it was just the receptionist confirming her visit time. This time the message read, "Alara, please call Dr. Reed as soon as possible. Urgent." Her heart plummeted. Urgent? What could be urgent now? He'd been doing so well. Hands trembling, she ducked into the quiet back office and dialed the clinic. "Alara," Dr. Reed's voice was tight, strained. "You need to come. Now it's Orion." "What? What's wrong?" Panic seized her. "He collapsed this morning. Wouldn't get up. His abdomen is distended, rigid. He's crying when we touch his belly. We think he might be bleeding internally again." The world tilted, numbered not again. He was so close. "I'm on my way," she choked out, already grabbing her jacket, muttering a frantic apology to her bewildered manager. The drive to the clinic was a blur of fear and frantic prayers. She burst through the doors, breathless, eyes scanning wildly for Dr. Reed. The vet met her immediately, her face grim. "We did an ultrasound," Dr. Reed said quickly, leading her toward the treatment area. "His belly is full of blood. There must have been a tiny tear, something we missed in the first surgery, maybe a vessel weakened by the initial trauma. It must have ruptured completely." Her voice was heavy with frustration and concern. "He's in hypovolemic shock. We're giving him fluids, trying to stabilize him. But Alara, he's fading fast. We have to go back in, right now. It's his only chance." Alara looked past Dr. Reed towards the exam room where Orion lay on the table, surrounded by technicians, looking terrifyingly still. The cost didn't even enter her mind this time. There was no decision to make. "Do it," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Whatever it takes, please save him." She instinctively reached for her phone to check the fundraiser balance. Thanks to the continued generosity, there were still substantial funds available, enough to cover another emergency surgery. She uttered a silent prayer of thanks for the strangers who had made this possible, whose kindness was literally giving Orion another shot at life. Orion was rushed back into surgery. Alara collapsed into a waiting room chair, feeling utterly helpless. Liam arrived within minutes, alerted by a frantic text from Alara. He sat with her, a silent pillar of support, as the clock ticked agonizingly slowly. This felt worse than the first time, the hope that had blossomed making the potential loss even more devastating. Hours passed. Finally, Dr. Reed appeared in the doorway, surgical mask dangling around her neck, her scrubs stained. She looked utterly drained, but her eyes held a spark of weary triumph. "We found it," she said, her voice raspy with fatigue. "A small bleeder on the mesenteric artery. Tiny, almost invisible during the first surgery, likely hidden by swelling and other damage. It must have slowly weakened and then just let go." She shook her head. "It's incredible how something so small could cause such a catastrophic bleed. We ligated it, suctioned out the blood, checked everything else thoroughly. He lost a lot again, but we got plasma into him on the table." She paused, meeting Alara's desperate gaze. "He's stable. Very, very weak, but stable. He's not out of the woods yet. Recovery will be tough, but he has a chance. A real chance this time." Alara choked back a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. She felt Liam's hand squeeze her shoulder. Orion, the warrior, had survived again. This time his recovery was different. Slower, more cautious, but blessedly steady. There were no more dramatic setbacks. The internal healing progressed. The leg continued to mend. The deep wounds faded into pale scars against his rapidly regrowing fur. He regained his strength gradually, his resilience shining through, and his bond with Alara deepened into something fierce and unwavering. He lived for her visits, his whole body wriggling with joy the moment he heard her voice. Finally, nearly 6 weeks after that fateful afternoon on Old Creek Road, Dr. Reed delivered the news Ilara had been longing to hear. "He's ready, Ilara. Orion can go home." The days leading up to Orion's discharge were a whirlwind of joyful, slightly frantic preparation. Ilara scrubbed her small apartment until it gleamed, banishing dust bunnies from corners that hadn't seen daylight in months. She painstakingly assembled the large orthopedic dog bed she'd splurged on, a thick memory foam mattress designed for large breeds with joint issues, a justifiable expense given Orion's history. She placed it in the sunniest corner of the living room, imagining him curled up there, finally safe and comfortable. She bought gleaming stainless steel food and water bowls, choosing heavy ones that wouldn't easily tip over. She selected a sturdy leather leash and a soft, padded collar in a deep forest green that she thought would look handsome against his sable fur. An assortment of chew toys, durable rubber kongs, tough knotted ropes, nylabones promising long-lasting enjoyment, were piled in a basket, a hopeful offering to distract him from the siren call of her second-hand furniture legs. Her apartment, usually just a functional space to sleep, eat, and store her books, began to feel different, charged with anticipation, transforming into a real home, ready to welcome its newest, most important resident. Getting him home, however, still presented a logistical challenge, albeit a more manageable one now. Her apartment was on the second floor of an older building with no elevator, and while Orion was walking well, navigating 2 flights of stairs immediately after the stress of leaving the clinic environment, especially with his still mending leg, would be difficult and potentially detrimental. And then there was the matter of transport. Liam's reliable but cramped hatchback had served its purpose admirably in the initial emergencies, but relying on him for every future vet follow-up, every trip to the park for carefully monitored exercise, wasn't practical or fair. The car fund was gone, sacrificed willingly and without regret, but the need for independent transport remained, perhaps even more acutely now, with a large dog requiring ongoing care. Fate, however, or perhaps just good timing and familial affection, intervened in the unexpected form of Uncle Marcus. Ilara's mother, Helen, a woman whose practicality often masked a deep well of maternal concern, had cautiously shared the ongoing saga of Orion's rescue, setbacks, and recovery, including the astonishing fundraising effort, with her brother during one of their weekly phone calls. Marcus Vance, Ilara's mother's older brother, was a retired mechanic, a man of few words with a perpetually gruff exterior that failed to completely conceal a heart as soft as Ilara's, especially when it came to his bookish niece. He wasn't active on social media, but Helen had forwarded him Liam's updates, and he had followed Orion's precarious journey with growing, albeit silently expressed, admiration for Ilara's unwavering dedication. He knew about her car savings, knew what that symbol of independence meant to her, knew the sting of its sacrifice. He called her a few days before Orion was scheduled for discharge, his voice characteristically gruff but lacking its usual edge of teasing. "Ellie," he said, using his childhood nickname for her, a rare sign of affection. "Your mom tells me the big fella's finally breaking out of jail." "Yes, he's coming home on Friday, Uncle Marcus," Ilara confirmed, happiness bubbling in her voice. "I can hardly believe it." Good dog. Tough one." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of Marcus clearing his throat. "Listen, your Aunt Carol and we've still got the old sedan sitting out back. The '98 Accord. Green one, remember it?" Ilara vaguely recalled the car from family gatherings years ago. "I think so." "Well," Marcus continued, getting to the point in his usual direct fashion, "it doesn't get used much since I retired. Mostly just sits in the driveway collecting dust and bird droppings. Needs a little TLC now and then. New battery last fall, but the engine's solid. Honda. Reliable old thing." Ilara held her breath, a dawning suspicion, a wild hope blooming in her chest. She wasn't sure where he was going with this. "Point is," Marcus continued, "it's just sitting there depreciating. You need wheels, especially now, hauling that big lug around to vet appointments and whatnot. It's yours, if you want it. Title's clear." Ilara was stunned into silence. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and sudden. "Uncle Marcus, I can't possibly accept that. It's too much." "Nonsense," he scoffed, sounding almost embarrassed by her emotional reaction. "Family helps family, that's the deal. Beside," he added, his voice regaining some of its usual gruffness, "it'll do the old girl good to be driven regularly instead of seizing up. Keeps the seals lubricated. Just promise me you'll check the oil religiously and the tire pressure." "I will," Ilara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you so much, Uncle Marcus. You have no idea what this means." Yeah, he mumbled. "Come by tomorrow after work. I'll give you the keys, show you its quirks. Don't expect miracles, mind. It ain't pretty." Marcus picked her up from the bookstore the next evening. The Accord was exactly as he described. Faded forest green paint, a constellation of minor dents and scratches testifying to years of service. An interior that smelled faintly but permanently of peppermint air freshener, old vinyl, and trace amounts of motor oil. The upholstery on the driver's seat was worn through in one spot. But when Marcus turned the key, the engine caught immediately with a steady, reassuring, surprisingly quiet rumble. It wasn't the sporty little hatchback she dreamed of saving for, the one that symbolized escape and adventure. This car felt different. Solid, dependable, practical. It felt like freedom, yes, but also like responsibility, like connection. It was a gift not just of transportation, but of trust and care. Driving it slowly, carefully, back to her apartment building, getting used to the feel of the steering wheel, the slightly soft brakes, Ilara felt a surge of profound gratitude that almost hurt. She could pick up her dog. She could drive him home herself. She could take him anywhere he needed to go. The discharge day finally arrived, bright and clear. Ilara practically vibrated with nervous excitement as she drove the Accord, her Accord, to the clinic, double-checking the back seat where she'd carefully laid down old blankets to protect the upholstery. She'd already settled the final bill, a process made remarkably stress-free thanks to the generosity of the fund. The remaining balance, still a respectable sum, was carefully earmarked in her budget spreadsheet for Orion's ongoing medications, future checkups, potential physical therapy, and a significant donation she planned to make in person to the Havenwood Animal Shelter, a tangible thank you to the community that had embraced their story. Dr. Reed and her entire team, Chloe, Barb, the other technicians who had cared for Orion during his long stay, gathered in the reception area to say goodbye. It felt less like a discharge and more like a graduation ceremony. They showered Orion with affectionate pats, ear scratches, and heartfelt farewell wishes. He looked magnificent, transformed from the broken creature Ilara had found weeks ago. His coat had grown back thick and glossy, mostly a deep sable brown, deepening to black along his spine and tail, with lighter tan markings on his legs and chest. Striking, intelligent, husky-like blue flecks marbled one of his warm brown eyes, giving him a unique, captivating expression. The scars beneath his fur were visible if you looked closely, pale, puckered lines mapping the history of his ordeal. But he carried himself with a newfound confidence, his tail held high, waving slowly like a furry flag. The cumbersome splint was gone, replaced only by the vet's instructions for careful, controlled leash walks and gradual increase in activity. He still had a slight, almost imperceptible limp on the injured leg, which Dr. Reed warned might be permanent due to the severity of the initial trauma. But he moved with surprising grace and power. As a final, crucial step before leaving, Ilara had the clinic implant a microchip beneath his shoulder blades. She filled out the registration paperwork carefully, listing her name, address, and phone number as the primary contact. Orion registered number 985170002345678 was officially, legally hers. No matter what happened now, he belonged with her. A sense of profound relief and security settled over her. Just as Alara was signing the final discharge papers, thanking Dr. Reed yet again for everything, her phone, tucked into her back pocket, rang. An unknown number. Normally, especially on a day like this, she'd ignore it, letting it go to voicemail. But after the roller coaster of the past weeks, a prickle of unease, a superstitious fear that bad news always lurked just around the corner, made her answer. "Hello? Is this Alara Vance?" A woman's sharp, slightly nasal voice inquired. There was an edge to it Alara didn't like. "Yes, speaking. My name is Cynthia Grisham. My husband Robert and I saw the posts online about the dog you found. The shepherd mix? Orion, you call him?" The way she said his name felt dismissive. "We believe he's ours. Our dog, Bandit." Alara's blood ran cold. Her hand tightened convulsively on the pen she was holding. "Bandit? No, this couldn't be happening. Not now. Not on the day he was finally coming home. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice suddenly thin. "His story has been online for weeks. No one came forward before." "We've been out of town," the woman said smoothly, perhaps a little too smoothly, "dealing with a complicated family emergency up north. No internet access. A friend just forwarded us the information yesterday evening. We saw the pictures. It's definitely him, our Bandit. We've been worried sick, posting flyers everywhere." Alara hadn't seen any flyers matching Orion's description, and she looked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, loud and frantic in the suddenly silent reception area. She looked over at Orion, who was leaning comfortably against her legs, happily accepting a final ear scratch from Chloe. Could it be true? Had she inadvertently stolen someone else's beloved pet? Had she allowed herself to fall completely, irrevocably in love with someone else's dog? The thought was devastating, nauseating. But if he truly had a family who missed him, who loved him, she had to do the right thing, didn't she? No matter how much it shattered her heart. Where are you now?" Alara asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to remain calm. Dr. Reed, overhearing the conversation, raised a questioning eyebrow, her expression shifting instantly from warmth to guarded alertness. "We're actually in Havenwood now. We drove straight down overnight as soon as we found out. We're desperate to see him. Could we possibly meet you? Perhaps right there? At the vet's office? Just to see him, confirm it's really our Bandit." Ilara's mind raced. It felt incredibly sudden, suspiciously convenient. Why now, on the very day of his discharge? Why hadn't they contacted the clinic directly? But she couldn't dismiss the possibility outright without appearing obstructive. What if they were telling the truth? "Okay," she agreed reluctantly, her stomach churning with dread. I'm still at Havenwood Animal Hospital right now. We were just about to leave." "Wonderful, perfect. We're only a few minutes away. Just stopped for gas. We'll be right there. Don't go anywhere." The line clicked dead before Alara could respond. Alara quickly, haltingly explained the situation to Dr. Reed and the gathered staff, her voice tight with anxiety. The celebratory atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by a tense, protective silence. Dr. Reed's expression became hard, professional. "All right, Alara," she said calmly but firmly. "Let's hear what they have to say. But I want you, Chloe, and Barb to stay right here with me. And remember," she added, lowering her voice slightly so only Alara could hear, "he's microchipped to you now, registered. Legally, the burden of proof is entirely on them to provide definitive, verifiable evidence of prior ownership. Don't let them intimidate you." A few minutes later, a nondescript, slightly battered beige sedan pulled haphazardly into the parking lot, taking up 2 spaces. A couple emerged quickly, A thin, severe-looking woman with sharp features, overly bright lipstick, and artificially blonde hair pulled back tightly, Cynthia Grisham presumably, and a heavier-set, florid-faced man with shifty, close-set eyes and a forced, ingratiating smile that didn't reach them. Robert. They hurried towards the clinic entrance, their eyes scanning the lobby with an unnerving intensity. There he is! Bandit! Oh, Bandit, baby! Cynthia exclaimed, her voice overly loud and theatrical, rushing towards Orion with outstretched hands, ignoring Alara completely. Orion, startled by the sudden loud approach and the unfamiliar, high-pitched voice, flattened his ears instinctively and pressed closer against Alara's legs, looking up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. He emitted a low, almost inaudible growl deep in his chest. He showed absolutely no sign of recognition, no welcoming wag of the tail, only apprehension. "He's probably just nervous," Robert Grisham said quickly, stepping forward, his smile widening slightly, falsely reassuring. "Maybe a little angry we were gone so long while he was hurt and alone. Animals can hold grudges, you know, sensitive creatures." It sounded vaguely plausible, Alara had to concede mentally, though Orion's reaction felt distinctly wary, even fearful, rather than petulant or reproachful. Dr. Reed watched the interaction silently from behind the reception desk, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable but radiating disapproval. Chloe and Barb stood nearby, silent sentinels. "We brought his harness," Cynthia said brightly, producing a slightly worn-looking red nylon harness from her oversized fake leather purse. "Mind if we just slip this on him? Get him ready to go home?" Reluctantly feeling trapped, Alara nodded mutely, as Cynthia fumbled awkwardly with the straps and buckles, seeming unfamiliar with how they worked. Orion kept trying to turn back towards Alara, whining softly under his breath, his body tense. Once the harness was finally secured, incorrectly buckled, Alara noted, Robert took the attached leash firmly in his hand. "Well, thank you so much for taking such good care of him, dear," he said patronizingly to Alara, patting her shoulder with excessive familiarity. "We're just so incredibly relieved to have our boy back. Can't tell you what it means." They started to turn toward the door, Robert giving the leash a sharp tug when Orion hesitated. But then Cynthia paused dramatically, turning back to Alara with an air of calculated, casual inquiry, as if the thought had just occurred to her. "Oh, one more thing," she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more conspiratorial. "We heard through the online posts that there were some donations made for his care? Quite a substantial amount, apparently." Her eyes flickered greedily towards Alara's purse. "Since he's coming home with us now, his rightful family, it only makes sense that any remaining funds come directly to us. You know, for his future medical needs, special food, ongoing care. These kinds of severe injuries can have unexpected long-term effects. Vet bills down the line." A massive, clanging alarm bell went off in Alara's mind. This wasn't just a request. It felt like a demand, slickly packaged in false concern. The timing, the behavior, the lack of proof, and now this. It all clicked into place. They weren't here for the dog, they were here for the money. The realization sent a surge of cold, clarifying anger through her. "Actually," Alara said, her voice suddenly clear and much firmer now, the tremor gone, replaced by a steely resolve fueled by indignation and fierce protectiveness of Orion. "The emergency surgeries, the intensive care, the medications, the complication with the infection. It was all extremely expensive. The final procedure and the extended hospitalization used up almost all of the generously donated funds. I have the final invoices right here." She patted her bag. "I was planning to donate the small remaining balance directly to the Havenwood Animal Shelter this afternoon, as a public thank you to the community for their incredible support." Cynthia's expression tightened instantly, the thin veneer of pleasantness cracking, revealing the hard, avaricious lines beneath. "But the money was donated specifically for his care. she insisted, her voice rising sharply, losing its smooth edge. For Bandit. As his family, we should be the ones to decide how it's used. We should get that money. It's rightfully ours. Robert Grisham stepped closer, abandoning the pretense of the friendly smile, his posture becoming subtly more intimidating, crowding Alara slightly. She's right, you know, he said, his voice low and gravelly. That money belongs with the dog. Hand it over. While they were arguing, Orion, clearly distressed by the rising tension and the man holding his leash, was actively pulling against it, straining to get back to Alara, his whining growing more audible, more anxious. Seeing his escalating anxiety, something inside Alara snapped. Enough! This wasn't right. This wasn't happening. She stepped forward decisively, reached out, and took the leash firmly from Robert's startled, suddenly slack grasp. Come here, boy, she said softly but commandingly. Orion immediately surged towards her, pressing his large body hard against her legs, looking up at her with palpable relief, his tail giving a frantic, low sweep against her jeans. He wasn't angry or confused or resentful. He was seeking refuge, seeking protection from these strangers. Dr. Reed and her staff, who had been observing the escalating exchange with mounting concern and barely concealed outrage, moved slightly closer, forming a silent, formidable wall of support behind Alara. The atmosphere in the small reception area crackled with tension. You sent me one picture, Alara said, facing the Grishams directly now, her voice steady and level, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She held the leash securely, her other hand resting protectively on Orion's broad head. One blurry, badly lit photo of a puppy that could honestly have been any generic shepherd, mixed puppy. You sent it before I agreed to meet you. Do you have any others? Vet records with the name Bandit on them? Adoption papers? Town license tags? Microchip information? Anything at all to definitively prove he's yours. She gestured around the clinic, then down at her phone lying on the counter. Orion hasn't even officially lived with me for 5 minutes yet, and my phone is already full of dozens of pictures and videos of him from his recovery here. Surely, if he was your beloved Bandit, your family member you were worried sick about, you'd have more than one grainy, questionable puppy photo. Cynthia and Robert exchanged a quick, nervous glance. They stammered, flustered. Photos were on an old, broken computer, they claimed. Vet records were lost during a recent move. They hadn't gotten around to getting him licensed yet. Their excuses were flimsy, transparent, falling apart under Alara's calm, direct questioning. They had no proof. Zero. And more importantly, more tellingly, the dog himself clearly showed no recognition of or affection for them. His bond, fierce and undeniable, was with Alara. He's not your dog, Alara stated flatly, unequivocally, her hand resting protectively on Orion's head, feeling the steady warmth of him against her leg. And you are absolutely not getting any money. Robert's face flushed a deep, mottled red with anger and thwarted greed. Now you listen here, you little bitch, he began, taking a menacing step forward, raising his hand slightly. Perhaps, Dr. Reed interjected smoothly, stepping forward from behind the counter, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that stopped Robert in his tracks. You'd like to wait while we contact the Havenwood Police Department? They can help sort out disputed ownership claims. We have the official microchip registration right here, completed and dated today, listing Ms. Alara Vance as the legal owner and responsible party for this dog, Orion. She held up the paperwork, her gaze steady and challenging. The mere mention of involving the police had an immediate, dramatic effect. The Grishams balked visibly, their bluster deflating like a punctured balloon. The prospect of official scrutiny, of having to explain their lack of proof to law enforcement, clearly terrified them. Fine, keep the damn mutt, Cynthia shrieked suddenly, her voice shrill and venomous, abandoning all pretense. He's probably damaged goods anyway after all that. We would have just dumped him somewhere ourselves after seeing what those vet bills probably were. Ungrateful little, Robert muttered under his breath, grabbing his wife's arm tightly and practically dragging her towards the exit. They scrambled back into their dilapidated sedan, Cynthia casting one last hateful glare towards Alara through the window. Then they sped out of the parking lot with a squeal of tires, leaving behind a residue of ugliness, greed, and profound relief in the suddenly quiet clinic. Alara stood frozen for a long moment, trembling violently with reaction. Orion pressed tightly against her, a low rumble still vibrating in his chest. Then the strength seemed to drain out of her legs, and she sank slowly to her knees on the cool linoleum floor, wrapping her arms fiercely around Orion's thick neck, burying her face in his soft, clean fur, inhaling his familiar scent. He responded by licking her cheek comfortingly, whining softly as if reassuring her. "Oh, Orion," she whispered into his fur, her voice choked with emotion. That was too close. Way too close." Dr. Reed knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her back. "You handled that perfectly, Alara," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "You were calm. You stood your ground. You didn't let them bully you. They were scammers, plain and simple. Opportunists preying on your good nature and the publicity surrounding Orion's story." She sighed heavily, shaking her head. "Unfortunately, it happens more often than you'd think in these high-profile rescue cases. People see a successful fundraiser and try to cash in. It's despicable." Shaken to the core, but immensely, profoundly relieved, Alara gradually gathered herself, helped to her feet by Liam, who had materialized beside her, his face pale with anger at what he'd witnessed. The confrontation had been horrible, unsettling, casting a brief, dark shadow over what should have been a purely joyful day. But it had also served a purpose. It had solidified, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Orion belonged with her. He was hers. He was home. With final, heartfelt thanks to Dr. Reed and her incredibly supportive team, Alara clipped Orion's new green leash onto his new soft collar, helping him carefully, gently into the back seat of the old Accord, arranging the blankets around him. She felt a profound sense of rightness, of destiny fulfilled. This wasn't quite the triumphant, uncomplicated homecoming she'd envisioned just an hour ago, but the ugly threat they had faced and overcome together had only served to strengthen their already powerful connection. As she pulled out of the clinic parking lot, leaving the scene of so much trauma and healing behind them, Orion settled onto the back seat, letting out a long, contented sigh. He rested his heavy head on the armrest between the front seats, watching her drive with trusting, intelligent brown eyes flecked with blue. They were finally, truly heading home, together. Bringing Orion across the threshold of her small second-floor apartment was the true beginning, the first real test of their new shared life. The 2 flights of stairs were, as anticipated, daunting. Alara took it slowly, patiently, step by agonizing step, using high-value treats Dr. Reed had recommended, tiny pieces of boiled chicken, and lavishing him with praise and encouragement for each successful riser navigated. Orion was hesitant, clearly uncomfortable, his recently healed leg held stiffly, but his trust in her was absolute. He followed her lead, whining softly with exertion and perhaps a little fear of the enclosed stairwell, but persevering until they finally reached the landing outside her apartment door. She unlocked it, pushed it open, and gestured him inside. He stood uncertainly for a long moment just inside the doorway, sniffing the air tentatively, his ears swiveling like radar dishes, taking in the unfamiliar landscape of her living room. The worn floral sofa, the overflowing bookshelves, the faint scent of lavender and old paper. Alara watched him, her heart swelling with a complex mix of joy, relief, and a sudden acute awareness of the responsibility she had undertaken. He looked huge in her small space, a tangible, breathing, shedding presence that instantly filled the quiet corners of her solitary life. "Welcome home, Orion," she said softly, closing the door behind them, sealing them into their new reality. "You're finally home." The first few days, then weeks, were an intense period of adjustment for both of them. Orion, despite his ordeal and the weeks spent in the structured environment of the clinic, seemed to possess remarkably little experience with the nuances of indoor living. Ilara suspected his life before the accident might have been spent primarily outdoors, perhaps chained or confined to a yard. He was initially wary, even fearful, of seemingly innocuous household noises. The sudden, startling roar of the vacuum cleaner sent him scrambling behind the sofa. The clatter of pans dropped in the kitchen made him flinch. The rhythmic rumble of the ancient refrigerator kicking on caused his ears to flatten. He paced restlessly at times, especially during the first few evenings, circling the small living room, unsure of the boundaries, the rules, the expectations of this strange new den. House training required patience, consistency, and a rapid education in canine body language for Ilara. There were a few inevitable accidents on her worn but cherished Persian rug in the first 48 hours, which Ilara cleaned up meticulously and without complaint, reminding herself that he was learning, that this was all new to him. He was incredibly hesitant to be left alone, even for short periods. The first time Ilara had to leave him for a 4-hour shift at the bookstore, she returned to find him whining anxiously by the door, surrounded by the shredded remains of a throw pillow he'd pulled off the sofa. Separation anxiety, Dr. Reed had warned, was common in rescue dogs, especially those with traumatic pasts. Ilara started implementing strategies, leaving him with puzzle toys stuffed with peanut butter, keeping her departures and arrivals low-key, gradually increasing the duration of her absences. It was a slow process, requiring patience and understanding. But overriding all the challenges, all the adjustments, was Orion's immense capacity for love and his palpable, heart-wrenching eagerness to please. He was incredibly intelligent and sensitive to her moods and tone of voice. He quickly learned the house rules. Off the sofa, mostly. Wait patiently for his food bowl. Leave it when investigating the tempting contents of the trash can. He responded with enthusiasm to Ilara's gentle guidance and positive reinforcement methods, seeming to blossom under the consistent affection and clear expectations. He discovered the deep, sigh-inducing joy of his plush orthopedic bed, often curling up on it voluntarily after a walk, watching her with half-closed eyes. He learned the satisfying crunch and challenge of his chew toys, gradually diverting his attention from table legs and stray shoes. He quickly figured out the routine of walks, waiting by the door with hopeful eyes, alert ears, and a furiously wagging tail whenever Ilara reached for the leash or her walking shoes. Their walks became the essential anchor of their days, crucial for both his physical rehabilitation and their bonding. Following Dr. Reed's advice, they started with short, slow excursions around the block, gradually increasing the distance and duration as his stamina improved and his legs strengthened. Ilara explored Havenwood's network of small neighborhood parks and the paved Riverside Trail, with Orion trotting happily, though still carefully, beside her. His limp became less noticeable each week, visible only after longer walks or if he attempted a sudden burst of movement. He was endlessly curious about the world beyond the apartment walls, squirrels chattering indignantly from the safety of oak trees, ducks gliding serenely on the river's surface. The complex tapestry of scents left by other dogs carried on the breeze. He was generally friendly, though initially cautious, towards other people and dogs they encountered, approaching with polite curiosity, tail giving a tentative wag, always looking back to Ilara for reassurance. Seeing him blossom, leaving the shadows of his trauma further behind each day, watching him rediscover the simple joys of being a dog, filled Ilara with a quiet, profound happiness that resonated deep within her. More profoundly, almost imperceptibly at first, Orion's steady, grounding presence began to subtly reshape Ilara's own inner landscape. Before him, her life had often felt muted, lived behind a protective scrim, overshadowed by a persistent, low-grade anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of her days and recurring waves of depressive fog that could descend without warning, making even simple tasks feel monumental. Draining the color from the world, she'd become adept at masking it, functioning adequately at school and now at work, projecting an image of quiet competence. But the internal struggle was constant, exhausting, isolating. With Orion, things began to shift, slowly but undeniably. The simple, non-negotiable demands of his care, the early morning walks regardless of weather or her own mood, the regular feeding schedule, the need for playtime, grooming, and focused attention, imposed a structure, a rhythm on her days that she hadn't been able to consistently maintain for herself. Waking up not to the oppressive weight of her own thoughts, but to Orion's wet nose nudging her hand, his expectant brown eyes urging her out of bed even when the familiar gray fog threatened to settle around her, became a powerful, undeniable motivator. Getting up for him was easier than getting up for herself. His uncomplicated affection, the sheer, unadulterated, unconditional love radiating from him whenever she walked through the door, began to chip away at the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart. She found herself talking to him constantly, narrating her day, sharing her frustrations about work, recounting amusing anecdotes, voicing anxieties she wouldn't have dreamed of sharing with another person. He listened with his head cocked attentively, his tail thumping softly against the floor, a perfect, non-judgmental, furry confidant who never offered unsolicited advice, only unwavering presence, just having his warm, solid body nearby when the familiar tightness of anxiety began to grip her chest was strangely, powerfully calming. He seemed preternaturally attuned to her emotional state, often nudging his heavy head under her hand or resting his chin gently on her knee when he sensed her tension rising, anchoring her to the present moment. He wasn't just a pet, a responsibility. He was rapidly becoming her anchor, her emotional support system, her furry, four-legged therapist who worked for kibble and ear scratches. She realized one afternoon, with a sense of quiet astonishment, that she hadn't experienced a full-blown, debilitating panic attack since he'd arrived. The familiar precursors, the racing heart, the shortness of breath, the sense of impending doom, still surfaced occasionally, triggered by stress or fatigue, but somehow his quiet presence, the simple act of running her fingers through his thick fur, often seemed to dissolve them before they could escalate into overwhelming terror. Liam became a regular, welcome visitor, quickly and officially designated as Uncle Liam. Orion adored him, greeting him at the door with enthusiastic leaps, which Ilara was trying to curb, happy barks and frantic tail wags that threatened to knock over the small entryway table. Liam, in turn, marveled at the transformation he witnessed in both Ilara and the dog. "You know," he commented one evening, sprawled comfortably on Ilara's floor while Orion attempted to lick his face off, "it's like you two pulled each other out of a ditch. You saved each other. You know that?" Ilara just smiled, gently redirecting Orion's enthusiastic affection, scratching him behind the ears. She didn't need to answer. She knew with every fiber of her being that Liam was right. Months melted away, marked by the changing seasons reflected in the leaves outside Ilara's window and the steady progress of Orion's healing. Spring deepened into a lush, green, humid summer. Orion completed his physical recovery, the limp now barely perceptible, visible only as a slight stiffness when he first got up or after a particularly long or vigorous play session at the unofficial dog park by the river. He filled out, his frame strong and muscular beneath a thick, glossy fur, a picture of canine health, vitality, and resilience. He was at his core a happy, goofy, incredibly loving dog, his latent puppy energy finally allowed to surface safely, tempered by the hard-won wisdom gained through suffering. He loved squeaky toys, destroying them with surgical precision, chasing squirrels he never caught, rolling in patches of cool grass, and leaning his full 80 pounds against Ilara's legs whenever she sat down. Ilara, too, felt lighter, more grounded, more present in her own life. The persistent fog of anxiety and depression hadn't vanished entirely. She knew it was likely a lifelong companion, but it lifted more often now, its grip less suffocating, its duration shorter. Her job at the bookstore still had its tedious moments, its difficult customers, but it no longer felt like the dead end of her ambition, the final stop. Having Orion, having navigated the intense ordeal of his rescue, the terrifying setbacks, the confrontation with the Grishams, and the daily responsibilities of his care, had instilled in her a quiet confidence, a resilient self-assurance she hadn't possessed before. She felt capable in a way that was new and empowering. Then came a day that shattered the newfound fragile equilibrium, reminding Ilara that stability could be terrifyingly ephemeral. It started badly, setting a dissonant tone from the outset. A major inventory discrepancy discovered during the morning stocktake at the bookstore led to a tense, uncomfortable meeting with Mr. Henderson and his usually cheerful wife, who handled the accounts. Although no blame was explicitly assigned, Ilara left the meeting feeling incompetent, defensive, and simmering with stress. The bus ride home, the Accord was temporarily back in Uncle Marcus's driveway for a minor, overdue tune-up he had insisted on performing himself, was unusually crowded, hot, and stifling, amplifying her sense of unease. She arrived back at her apartment building feeling drained, irritable, frayed around the edges, the familiar, unwelcome tendrils of anxiety tightening around her chest like icy vines. Orion, of course, greeted her with his usual unrestrained, uncomplicated joy, his tail whipping back and forth so hard his whole body wriggled, a well-loved, slobbery tennis ball clamped firmly in his mouth as a welcome offering. His sheer, unadulterated enthusiasm was usually infectious, a guaranteed mood lifter. Today, however, Ilara struggled to meet it, managing only a weak, forced smile as she clipped on his leash. Okay, big guy," she murmured, her voice flat. "Let's go walk it off." The walk helped, marginally. The familiar rhythm of their steps, the cool evening air against her flushed cheeks, Orion's happy presence trotting beside her, eased some of the acute tension. But when they returned to the quiet apartment, the residual stress of the day quickly resurfaced, settling heavily in her stomach. Ilara sank onto the sofa, kicking off her shoes, and pulled out her phone, intending to mindlessly scroll through social media as a form of temporary escape. Instead, she saw the notifications, several missed calls and urgent-sounding texts from her mother, Helen. A knot of cold dread formed instantly in her stomach. Her mother was practical, independent, and rarely called multiple times unless it was truly important. She listened to the first voicemail, Helen's voice tight with worry, trying to sound calm but failing. "Ilara, honey, call me as soon as you possibly get this. It's Grandpa Arthur. He collapsed this afternoon. He's at the retirement village infirmary. They think he might have had a stroke." The world seemed to stop, the air sucked out of the room. Grandpa Arthur, her rock, her confidant, the teller of terrible puns and giver of surprisingly insightful, gently delivered advice, the one person in her family who had always unequivocally believed in her potential, even when she was drowning in self-doubt. The news hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. The accumulated stress of her bad day, the lingering feelings of inadequacy, combined with the sudden, terrifying shock and fear for her beloved grandfather, overwhelmed her fragile defenses completely. Her heart began to pound erratically, violently, a frantic, runaway drummer against her ribs. Her breath hitched, coming in short, shallow, inadequate gasps. The room started to spin, the edges blurring, the familiar objects, bookshelves, lamps, Orion's toy basket, seeming to tilt and warp. Cold, clammy sweat prickled her skin. She felt overwhelmingly faint, dizzy, a crushing, invisible weight settling heavily on her chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. Panic attack. Raw, terrifying, and utterly overwhelming. She slid off the sofa onto the floor, instinctively curling into a tight ball, pressing her forehead against the rough fibers of the rug, trying desperately, uselessly, to regain control, to draw a deep breath. But her lungs refused to cooperate, trapped in a cycle of shallow, panicked gasps. Tears streamed down her face, hot and uncontrolled. This was the worst one she'd had in months, maybe even years, a full-blown hijacking of her body and mind. She hadn't had an attack this severe since Orion had come into her life. He was usually her furry, four-legged preventative measure, his calming presence a buffer against the storm. But this time, the trigger was too strong, too sudden, too deeply personal. As she gasped for air on the floor, lost in the terrifying, isolating vortex of panic, feeling utterly helpless, something wet and insistent nudged her clenched hand. Orion. He whined softly, a low, guttural sound of canine concern, pressing his large head insistently against her arm. Then he did something utterly astonishing, something that defied explanation, something that would forever alter Ilara's understanding of his intelligence and empathy. He backed away slightly, looked intently at her, then turned and trotted purposefully towards a small kitchen table, where Ilara had left her reusable water bottle after their walk. Gently, carefully, using his nose and muzzle with surprising dexterity, he nudged the tall metal bottle until it tipped over onto the floor with a soft clang. Then he picked up the bottle carefully in his mouth, avoiding the plastic cap, his grip firm but gentle. He padded silently back to where Ilara lay, curled on the floor, and dropped the bottle softly, precisely right beside her hand. Water. He brought her water. Ilara stared at him through her tears, momentarily stunned out of the worst of the panic by the sheer unexpectedness of his action. How? But he wasn't finished. He looked from the water bottle to her face, then turned again and trotted swiftly towards her bedroom. A moment later, he reappeared, dragging one of her pillows, a soft, squishy feather pillow, her favorite. Across the floor with determined effort, he navigated it around the coffee table and nudged the pillow gently towards her head. Lie down, rest, be comfortable. The sheer unexpectedness, the apparent understanding and purpose in his sequential actions, pierced through the thick, suffocating fog of her panic like a beam of light. Taking ragged but slightly deeper breaths now, Ilara managed to unscrew the cap of the water bottle with trembling fingers and take a small, grateful sip. Following his unspoken, pillow-proffered suggestion, she slowly, carefully eased herself down from her tightly coiled ball, resting her head on the soft pillow he had so thoughtfully provided. Then Orion did the most comforting, most grounding thing of all. He lay down beside her on the rug, pressing his large, warm, solid body firmly against hers, from shoulder to hip. Gently, deliberately, he rested his heavy head directly on her chest, right over her erratically beating heart. She could feel the steady rhythmic rise and fall of his own breathing beneath his fur, a slow, deep, calming tempo. Instinctively, desperately, she focused on it, on the physical sensation of his weight, his warmth, and the gentle cadence of his respiration. She tried to match her own frantic gasps to his even breaths. Inhale with Orion, exhale with Orion. Inhale, exhale. The physical pressure of his head was grounding, a tangible anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. His warmth seeped into her, a solid reassurance against the cold tendrils of fear. Slowly, gradually, minute by painstaking minute, The frantic pounding in her chest subsided, replaced by a steadier, calmer rhythm. Her breathing deepened, lengthened, steadied. The dizziness receded. The crushing weight eased. The panic loosened its terrifying, suffocating grip, releasing her back into her own body. She lay there on the floor, limp with exhaustion, but breathing normally again, stroking Orion's soft fur, listening to his quiet, even breathing, until the last vestiges of the tremors faded. She looked down at the dog resting peacefully, almost proprietorially, on her chest. His eyes closed now, his breathing deep and regular. How had he known what to do? Fetching water? Fetching a pillow? Applying deep pressure stimulation? These were techniques sometimes used by trained psychiatric service dogs, but Orion had received no such training. No one had taught him this sequence. It was as if his own profound experiences with pain, fear, helplessness, and the solace of receiving comfort had equipped him with an astonishingly deep, innate empathy, an instinctive understanding of how to help the person who had saved him, the person who was now his entire world. He had recognized her distress not just as fear, but as a specific kind of distress, and had responded not with simple canine comfort, but with focused, intelligent, problem-solving action. Tears welled again, but this time they were tears of profound gratitude, wonder, and overwhelming awe. He hadn't just changed her life by his mere presence. He was actively, intuitively, intelligently caring for her in ways she hadn't thought possible, forging a bond deeper and more complex than she could have imagined. After several minutes of quiet, shared calm, Elara felt steady enough to slowly sit up. Orion immediately lifted his head, watching her with soft, concerned eyes, giving her cheek a gentle, questioning lick as if to double-check that she was truly okay. "Thank you, Orion," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, wrapping her arms around his thick neck and hugging him tightly. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." He responded with a contented sigh and another gentle lick. Now calm enough to think clearly, the urgency of the situation flooding back, Elara picked up her phone and called her mother back. Helen answered on the first ring, her voice frayed with worry. She quickly filled Elara in. Grandpa Arthur had indeed suffered a stroke, but the initial assessment suggested it was relatively mild. He was conscious, able to speak, though with some difficulty, and most importantly, he was stable. He was currently undergoing tests in the small infirmary wing at Havenwood Meadows, his retirement village. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his potential for recovery, but he was weak, frightened, and disoriented. "He'd love to see you, honey," Helen said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He's already asked for you twice, whenever you can make it. No rush, but soon would be good." "I'll be there as soon as I possibly can, Mom," Elara promised, relief that it wasn't immediately catastrophic, mingling with the urgent need to see him, to reassure herself and him. "Tell him I'm on my way." As she hung up, her gaze fell on the keys to the old Accord lying on her counter, retrieved from Uncle Marcus earlier that day after its tune-up. A transport, independence. She didn't need to arrange a ride, didn't need to check unreliable bus schedules, didn't need to impose on Liam. She could just go, and she knew with sudden, absolute certainty exactly who was coming with her. Grandpa Arthur adored animals, and he'd been completely captivated by the stories and pictures of Orion she'd shared with him over the past months. Seeing the dog who had not only survived against all odds, but had also, just moments ago, literally pulled his granddaughter back from the brink of a panic attack. It might just be the best medicine imaginable for both of them. "Come on, boy," Elara said, grabbing the leash in her purse, her voice filled with renewed purpose. "Let's go see Grandpa." Orion, instantly sensing the shift in her energy, the purpose in her voice, was immediately on his feet, tail giving a hopeful, questioning wag. ready as always for whatever came next. The Havenwood Meadows retirement village, nestled amongst meticulously landscaped gardens and mature oak trees on the quieter, more affluent east side of town, exuded an air of tranquil order. It was less an institutional facility and more a self-contained community, with cheerful, well-maintained bungalows clustered around a central building that housed dining rooms, activity centers, a small library, and the compact but well-equipped infirmary wing where Arthur Vance now rested. Elara felt a familiar pang of affection for the place. She'd visited her grandfather here countless times, now overlaid with a heavy layer of worry as she pulled the sturdy old Accord into a designated visitor parking spot beneath a flowering crabapple tree. Getting Orion inside required a brief but earnest explanation at the main reception desk. Elara explained the situation: her grandfather's sudden illness, his known love for animals, and Orion's exceptionally calm temperament. She discreetly omitted the recent panic attack intervention, focusing instead on his general good behavior. Fortunately, the head nurse on duty, a pleasant woman named Carol, whom Elara recognized from previous visits, was already familiar with Elara and Arthur, and perhaps had even heard whispers of Orion's local fame following the fundraising efforts in his dramatic recovery. After confirming with Arthur's attending physician that a brief canine visit wouldn't be detrimental, Carol readily granted permission, asking only that Orion remain leashed at all times and be kept calm and well-behaved. "Honestly, dear," Carol confided with a warm smile, "sometimes a friendly animal does more good than any medicine we can offer, especially for someone like Arthur." Orion, seeming to sense the quiet, hushed atmosphere of the building, walked calmly and politely beside Elara down the wide, brightly lit, spotlessly polished corridor, his claws clicking softly, rhythmically, on the gleaming linoleum floor. He ignored the whirring sound of a cleaning machine down the hall and the clatter of a dropped tray from the nearby dining room, his focus entirely on Elara, his tail held in a relaxed, neutral position. They found Arthur in room 3, a bright, airy private room with large windows overlooking a meticulously tended rose garden, currently bursting with fragrant blooms in shades of pink, red, and yellow. He was propped up against several pillows in the adjustable hospital bed, looking undeniably pale and significantly older than Elara remembered from their lunch date just last week. An IV line snaked into his arm, and monitors beside the bed beeped softly, reassuringly. But his eyes, though slightly clouded, lit up with genuine pleasure when he saw her enter. "Ellie Bean," he rasped, his voice weaker than usual, slightly slurred on one side, a visible reminder of the stroke's neurological impact. He attempted a smile, which seemed a little crooked, but was filled with affection. "And who's this handsome fellow you've brought?" "This is Orion, Grandpa," Elara said softly, approaching the bed and leading the dog closer so Arthur could see him properly. "He heard you weren't feeling well. He wanted to come meet you." Orion approached the bed cautiously, his ears forward, sniffing the unfamiliar hospital smells: antiseptic, medications, illness. He stretched his neck forward to sniff Arthur's outstretched hand, then, seeming satisfied, gave it a gentle, tentative lick. Arthur chuckled, a weak but genuine sound that warmed Elara's heart. "Well, hello there, Orion," he murmured, his good hand stroking Orion's broad, soft head. "Heard all about you, son. Quite the survivor, aren't you? A real warrior." He looked at Elara, his eyes twinkling despite his weakness. "Just like my Ellie." Elara felt a warmth spread through her chest, easing some of the tightness of worry. She pulled up a visitor's chair, took her grandfather's cool, dry hand in hers, and sat beside the bed. Orion, after his initial greeting, seemed to assess the situation with quiet, uncanny intelligence. Instead of pacing or seeking further attention, he surprised Elara by hopping gently, with remarkable agility despite his size and history, onto the low, padded vinyl visitor's armchair beside the bed. He circled once, then curled up compactly, resting his heavy head near Arthur's arm on the mattress, and let out a soft, contented sigh, closing his eyes. He remained there peacefully, a calming, unobtrusive, furry presence, while Alara and her mother, Helen, who arrived shortly after, breathless and anxious, talked quietly with Arthur. Helen, initially perhaps a little skeptical about bringing a large dog into an infirmary room, quickly saw how Orion's quiet presence seemed to soothe her father, and she offered the dog a grateful smile and a gentle scratch behind the ears. Arthur recounted the events leading up to the stroke, the sudden dizziness while reading the newspaper, the numbness spreading down his left side, the frightening inability to form words clearly. With surprising lucidity, his mind sharp even if his body was temporarily betraying him. Throughout the visit, which stretched longer than Alara had anticipated as Arthur seemed reluctant for them to leave, Orion's behavior was extraordinary, almost preternaturally attuned to the emotional undercurrents in the room. He remained largely still on the armchair, seemingly dozing, a silent guardian keeping watch. When Arthur eventually drifted off into a light, medication-aided sleep, Orion didn't stir, simply remained a warm, breathing statue of quiet support. Later, when other family members, Alara's practical Aunt Jean and her two boisterous teenage cousins, arrived, filling the small room with their anxious energy, hushed questions, and well-meaning but slightly overwhelming expressions of concern, Orion seemed to sense the subtle shift in atmosphere, the underlying tension beneath the forced cheerfulness. He hopped down silently from the armchair and moved quietly, gracefully among the newcomers. He didn't jump or bark. Instead, he approached each person in turn, nudging a hand here, resting his heavy head briefly on a knee there, offering silent, undemanding comfort. He seemed to gravitate particularly towards Aunt Jean, who looked pale and close to tears, leaning his solid weight against her legs until she instinctively reached down to stroke his back, her breathing visibly deepening. He wasn't demanding attention. He was offering support, his gentle, intuitive presence subtly diffusing the anxiety in the room, creating small pockets of shared calm. One of the nurses, a kind-faced woman with warm brown eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, who came in periodically to check Arthur's vital signs and adjust his IV drip, watched Orion's quiet ministrations with a thoughtful, appreciative expression. She recognized Alara and Orion not just from the Havenwood grapevine, but also from the local news segment that had briefly covered his rescue and the subsequent community fundraising success months earlier. "You know, Alara," Brenda said softly, pausing by the door as she was leaving after checking on Arthur, who was now sleeping more deeply, "Orion has the most wonderful, calming temperament. So gentle, so patient, so incredibly intuitive." She smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Have you ever considered getting him evaluated and certified as a therapy dog? He seems like such a natural." Alara looked over at Orion, who was now patiently allowing her youngest cousin, mesmerized, to gently stroke his back, his tail giving slow, soft thumps against the floor. She hadn't actively thought about it before, her focus having been so intensely centered on his complex recovery, their adjustment to living together, and navigating her own anxieties. But watching him now, witnessing firsthand his innate ability to connect with and comfort people in distress, his quiet confidence in an unfamiliar, potentially stressful environment, it made sudden, perfect sense. It felt like a calling. "A therapy dog?" Alara repeated, the idea taking immediate root in her mind, feeling instantly right. "Yes," Brenda continued enthusiastically, clearly passionate about the subject. "There are wonderful organizations that train and certify dogs like Orion, dogs with that special blend of calmness, confidence, and empathy, to visit places like hospitals, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers, schools, even disaster relief zones sometimes. Places where people are stressed, lonely, ill, or traumatized, and could really benefit from the unique, non-judgmental comfort that animals can provide." She looked approvingly at Orion, who had now settled back onto the armchair. He clearly has the right core disposition, gentle, patient, friendly, but not overly exuberant, non-reactive to unexpected sounds or movements. It takes specific training and socialization, of course, and a significant commitment from you as his handler. But honestly, I think he'd be absolutely amazing at it. He has the heart for it. She quickly scribbled a website address and a phone number on a sticky note from her pocket. This is the regional organization, Positive Connections, that handles therapy animal certifications in our area. They're excellent. Might be worth looking into when things settle down with your grandfather. Elara thanked her sincerely, carefully tucking the precious, sticky note into her pocket. The idea resonated deeply within her, sparking an unexpected flicker of excitement amidst the worry for her grandfather. It felt like a way to honor Orion's incredible resilience, to channel his extraordinary capacity for empathy, an empathy perhaps born from his own suffering, into something positive, something healing for others. It also felt profoundly like a way to give back, to pay forward the incredible wave of kindness and generosity the Havenwood community and strangers far beyond had shown them when they were desperate and needed it most. The donations had saved Orion's life. Perhaps now, together, they could help bring comfort and light into the lives of others. Over the next few weeks, as Arthur steadily recovered from his stroke with encouraging speed, his prognosis improving daily, the doctors now predicting a near-full recovery with dedicated physical therapy, Elara found herself increasingly drawn to the idea Brenda had planted. She researched Positive Connections online, reading about their mission, their rigorous training standards, their evaluation process. She talked it over tentatively with Liam, who was immediately enthusiastic. "Dude, that's perfect. Orion would be the king of therapy dogs." She discussed it with Dr. Reed during one of Orion's routine checkups. The vet wholeheartedly endorsed the idea, confirming Orion's excellent temperament and physical suitability. She even mentioned it to Uncle Marcus during one of his just checking the oil visits. He surprised her by grunting his unequivocal approval. "Good for the dog. Good for you too, probably. Keep you both busy." The commitment, Elara realized, was significant. It wasn't just about Orion's behavior. It was about her ability to handle him calmly and confidently in challenging, unpredictable environments. It would involve weekly obedience classes to solidify his basic commands under distraction, followed by specialized therapy dog training sessions focusing on socialization, exposure to potentially stressful stimuli, medical equipment, crowds, loud noises, unfamiliar people, and handler skills. Finally, there would be a rigorous temperament and skills evaluation for them as a team. It would require time, effort, and more money for classes and fees. But Elara felt a growing conviction, a quiet certainty that this was the right path for them, a natural extension of their improbable journey together. They enrolled in an advanced obedience class held at the local community center. Orion, intelligent and exceptionally eager to please Elara, excelled, quickly mastering commands like "leave it," even when faced with dropped hot dogs, holding long downstays amidst playful puppies, and walking politely on a loose leash past intriguing distractions. Elara, meanwhile, learned to read his subtle body language more accurately, to give clear, consistent cues, and to remain calm and reassuring even when faced with challenges. The real test, however, came with the specialized therapy dog training workshops offered by Positive Connections, held on weekends at various locations, community centers, libraries, even simulated hospital room setups. These sessions were specifically designed to expose Orion and Elara as a team to the kinds of situations they might encounter during actual therapy visits. They practiced navigating crowded hallways filled with volunteer patients using walkers, wheelchairs, and crutches. They learned to ignore startling noises, dropped metal bedpans clattering loudly, sudden alarms sounding, volunteers simulating loud arguments or crying fits. They practiced remaining calm and accepting petting, sometimes clumsy or overly enthusiastic, from a wide variety of strangers, played by experienced training volunteers. They visited carefully simulated hospital rooms filled with unfamiliar smells, rubbing alcohol, disinfectant, and the beeping sounds of medical equipment. They practiced entering and exiting elevators calmly, squeezing into tight spaces, and learning to remain completely unfazed by sudden, loud noises, unexpected movements, or even people behaving erratically. There were definitely moments of difficulty, challenges they had to overcome together. Orion was initially quite wary of the loud metallic clatter of the dropped bedpan, his ears flattening, his body tensing, clearly triggering some echo of past trauma. But Alara's calm voice, her reassuring touch, and a pocket full of high-value treats helped him learn to associate the scary sound with positive reinforcement, gradually desensitizing him. He wasn't particularly fond of the confinement and strange movement of the elevator at first, pacing nervously and whining softly, but with patience, repetition, and lots of encouragement, and more chicken, he learned to sit calmly by her side during the ride, trusting her implicitly. Through it all, his fundamental gentleness, his deep well of patience, and his unwavering trust in Alara shone through brightly. He constantly looked to her for cues, for reassurance, his confidence growing visibly with each successful challenge navigated, each new environment mastered. Alara, too, found herself growing and changing significantly through the intensive process. Guiding Orion confidently through the often chaotic training scenarios required a level of patience, clear communication, focused awareness, and calm assertiveness she hadn't always possessed. Learning to advocate for him, explaining his role and needs to volunteers, interacting confidently with trainers and other handlers, pushed her far outside her natural introverted comfort zone, building her own self-confidence alongside his. She learned to anticipate potential problems, to read environments quickly, to de-escalate stressful situations, skills that benefited her not just as a handler, but in all areas of her life. Finally, after months of dedicated training, consistent practice, and considerable effort, came the official evaluation day. Held at a neutral community center location, a certified evaluator from Positive Connections, a calm, observant woman named Sarah, observed Alara and Orion navigate a lengthy series of complex, realistic scenarios designed to rigorously test Orion's temperament, obedience, reliability, and overall suitability for therapy work, as well as Alara's handling skills and ability to manage him effectively and safely. Orion had to remain calm and composed while strangers approached erratically, while loud noises occurred nearby without warning, while someone simulated falling or crying out in distress. He had to walk politely on a loose leash through a simulated crowd of volunteers, pushing strollers and carrying noisy bags, accept handling, including examination, of ears, paws, and mouth. Calmly from the evaluator, ignore dropped food and toys, and demonstrate unwavering focus on Alara amidst numerous deliberate distractions. Alara's heart pounded nervously throughout the lengthy evaluation, her palms sweating, but Orion was magnificent. He moved through each exercise with a quiet dignity, a calm focus, and an unwavering gentleness that impressed everyone present. He remained calm, focused, and gentle throughout, responding instantly and accurately to Alara's quiet verbal cues and subtle hand signals, his tail giving soft, happy wags when praised for completing a task successfully. He seemed to understand the importance of the day, rising to the occasion with grace. At the end of the rigorous 2-hour testing period, the evaluator, Sarah, smiled broadly, clipping her clipboard shut. "He's exceptional, Alara," she announced, her voice warm with genuine admiration. "Truly exceptional. His temperament is rock solid, his focus on you is incredible, and his intuitive gentleness is exactly what we look for. He's one of the most naturally suited candidates I've evaluated in a long time. She reached down to give Orion an appreciative scratch behind the ears. You've both clearly worked very hard. Congratulations, Orion has passed his evaluation with flying colors. He is officially certified as a positive connections therapy dog. Elara knelt down on the floor and hugged Orion tightly, burying her face in his thick, soft fur, overwhelmed with pride, relief, and a profound sense of accomplishment. We did it, boy, she whispered into his ear, her voice choked with happy tears. We really, really did it. Orion responded by licking her face enthusiastically, his tail thumping a joyous rhythm against the polished floor. Their first official visits as a certified therapy dog team were to the pediatric ward at Havenwood General Hospital, a place filled with a unique mixture of bravery, boredom, fear, and hope. Walking through the bright, sometimes intimidatingly sterile hallways, decorated with cheerful but slightly faded cartoon characters, Elara felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. But Orion, wearing his official blue, positive connections therapy dog, please ask to pet vest, seemed to understand his purpose instinctively. He walked calmly and confidently by her side, his demeanor radiating quiet reassurance. The effect his presence had was immediate and magical. In the pediatric ward, children's faces, often pale and drawn with illness or boredom, lit up with smiles as they entered patient rooms, always after getting explicit permission from nursing staff and parents. Shy, withdrawn children who had been refusing to interact emerged cautiously from their protective shells to gently stroke Orion's soft fur, their fingers tracing the patterns in his coat. Children facing painful procedures or recovering from surgery found a momentary welcome distraction from their discomfort, burying their faces in his thick neck ruff, whispering secrets into his patient, attentive ears. He seemed to possess an uncanny sixth sense, knowing instinctively who needed him most at that moment. He would rest his heavy head gently on the beds of the quietest, weakest children, offering silent, unwavering companionship. A warm, breathing presence that spoke volumes without words. One memorable visit involved a little girl named Lily, about 6 years old, recovering from a serious asthma attack that had left her frightened and withdrawn. She hadn't spoken much since being admitted 2 days prior. When Elara and Orion entered her room, Lily watched them silently from her bed, her large eyes wary. Elara sat quietly on a chair nearby, letting Orion simply exist in the space. After a few minutes, Orion padded softly over to the bedside and rested his chin gently on the edge of the mattress, looking up at Lily with his soft brown eyes. Tentatively, Lily reached out a small hand and touched his nose. Orion remained perfectly still. Slowly, hesitantly, Lily began to stroke his head. A tiny smile touched her lips. After several minutes of silent communion, Lily looked at Elara and whispered, her voice barely audible, "He's soft." It was the first sentence she had spoken to anyone other than her parents since arriving. By the end of their 20-minute visit, Lily was chattering quietly to Orion, telling him about her cat at home, her face animated, her fear momentarily forgotten. Her nurse, watching from the doorway, had tears in her eyes. They expanded their visits, joining a regular rotation at several local nursing homes, including Havenwood Meadows. Grandpa Arthur, now back in his own comfortable bungalow and making excellent progress with his physical therapy, beamed with immense pride as Orion charmed the other residents, patiently accepting pats from trembling hands, resting his head on laps, and occasionally performing his best sit pretty for a proffered biscuit. Orion seemed particularly drawn to residents who were nonverbal or suffered from advanced dementia, often settling quietly at their feet, offering a connection that transcended language and cognitive barriers. Elara witnessed several instances where a resident, lost in the fog of dementia, became suddenly lucid and animated for brief periods while interacting with Orion, sometimes sharing a fragmented memory triggered by the feel of his fur, a fleeting glimpse into the person they once were. These moments were poignant, bittersweet, and incredibly powerful. They also began visiting local elementary schools, participating in a Reading Education Assistance Dogs (READ) program, where children who struggled with reading or lacked confidence could practice reading aloud to a patient, non-judgmental canine listener. Orion was a natural. He would lie calmly on a soft mat while a nervous child sat beside him, stumbling haltingly through the pages of a simple book. Orion never corrected, never judged, simply listened attentively, occasionally sighing contentedly or nudging the child's hand with his nose as if offering encouragement. Ilara saw firsthand how these sessions boosted the children's confidence, reduced their anxiety about reading, and fostered a genuine love of books associated with the positive experience of cuddling with a friendly dog. One little boy, who had severe anxiety about reading in front of his peers, blossomed over several weeks of reading to Orion, eventually volunteering to read aloud in class, a breakthrough his teacher attributed almost entirely to his sessions with his reading buddy. Ilara even started volunteering, cautiously at first, with a local mental health initiative, bringing Orion to weekly support group meetings for adults dealing with anxiety and depression, topics Ilara understood all too well from personal experience. Here, Orion's role was more subtle. He would often just wander quietly around the room during the sessions, allowing people to pet him if they wished, sometimes settling near someone who seemed particularly distressed or withdrawn. His calming, grounding presence often seemed to lower the overall tension in the room, making it easier for participants to open up, share difficult feelings, or simply feel less alone in their struggles. More than once, someone reached down to stroke Orion's fur while talking about a painful experience, his presence providing a silent, tangible source of comfort that facilitated emotional expression. The therapy work was demanding, emotionally taxing at times. Ilara had to be constantly vigilant, monitoring Orion's stress levels, advocating for his needs, navigating complex emotional situations with sensitivity and professionalism. There were difficult visits, encountering someone with a deep-seated fear of dogs, dealing with an unexpected medical emergency in a facility, managing Orion's occasional fatigue after a long session, but the rewards were immeasurable. Seeing the direct, positive impact Orion had on people's lives, witnessing the small miracles of connection and comfort he facilitated, the genuine smiles he brought to faces etched with pain or loneliness, filled Ilara with a profound sense of purpose, a quiet satisfaction that resonated deeper than any personal achievement. This dog, saved by chance and compassion from the brink of death on a lonely roadside, was now a beacon of hope, a furry ambassador of healing and kindness in their community. And the work continued to heal Ilara too, in ways she hadn't anticipated. Engaging regularly with people from all walks of life, sharing Orion's remarkable story, and, sometimes carefully, parts of her own, witnessing the undeniable power of the human-animal bond firsthand, chipped away steadily at the foundations of her own anxieties. Focusing her energy outward on helping others shifted her perspective, diminishing the overwhelming power of her own internal struggles. The bouts of depressive fog still rolled in occasionally, but they felt less frequent now, less dense, less persistent, often overshadowed by the tangible meaning and deep human connection she found in their shared mission. She felt less like a victim of her own mind and more like an active participant in a larger circle of giving and receiving comfort. One crisp, cool autumn evening, nearly 18 months after that fateful walk home from the bookstore that had irrevocably altered the course of her life, Ilara sat with Orion on a familiar park bench overlooking the Stillwater River. The setting sun painted the sky in breathtaking hues of fiery orange, soft pink, and deep violet, reflecting shimmering paths of light on the water's surface. Orion rested his heavy head comfortably on her lap, sighing contentedly, his warm breath misting slightly in the cooling air. Elara stroked his soft fur, the repetitive motion soothing, contemplative, reflecting on the improbable, challenging, ultimately transformative journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. And she thought of the broken, bleeding creature she'd found lying helpless on the roadside verge, the overwhelming fear and uncertainty of those first hours, the astonishing, unexpected outpouring of community support that had made his survival possible, the terrifying medical setbacks that had tested their resilience to the limit, the ugly confrontation with the Grishams that had solidified their bond, his incredible intuitive comfort during her debilitating panic attack, and now their shared meaningful work bringing solace and moments of joy to others in their community. She had stopped that day on Old Creek Road simply wanting to alleviate suffering, wanting to save a life, impulsively giving up her own small, carefully nurtured dream in the process. She hadn't known then, couldn't possibly have known, that in saving Orion, she was also profoundly saving herself. He had been dying on the edge of the road, overlooked, abandoned, discarded. Now, months later, he was not just surviving but thriving. A happy, healthy, deeply beloved companion, a certified therapy dog radiating calm, confidence, and unconditional kindness wherever he went. And Elara, once feeling adrift in a sea of anxiety and uncertain purpose, had found her footing, her voice, her own quiet strength, anchored by the unwavering loyalty, the intuitive wisdom, and the boundless love of the remarkable dog who had quite literally changed everything. The journey had been fraught with unexpected twists, heart-stopping challenges, and moments of profound despair and equally profound joy. But looking down at Orion, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breathing beneath her hand, watching the twilight deepen around them, Elara Vance knew with an absolute, unshakable certainty that settled deep in her bones that she wouldn't change a single, difficult, beautiful moment. They had found each other in the darkness, two strays on the edge of existence, and together, step by painstaking step, they had walked out into the warm, welcoming light. Their incredible story, woven from threads of trauma, compassion, resilience, and connection, was far from over. In many ways, it felt like it was just beginning.